Episode 7 of Life on Earth is called Victors of the Dry Land, and it is about reptiles. So this episode opens up with a montage of various reptiles on the Galapagos. There's a lot of close-up shots of giant tortoises and iguanas. It looks pretty weird. You do get a sense of how strange they look. Like, I've never really given too much thought into how weird they actually look, but they do. And the music in the background, that actually plays throughout the episode, is kind of reminiscent of various, like, Ray Harryhausen films, which obviously had a lot of footage of various claymation monsters and dinosaurs. I think the latter is probably the reason that the music is so similar to that. I don't know if that was a conscious choice, but it's something that I was definitely conscious of throughout the episode. But from there, we talk about various aspects of reptiles. The most notable of these being scales. So obviously, all reptiles have scales. That is the reason they were able to basically conquer the land initially. They had a watertight skin, and they highlight how vital that it was compared to amphibians. Obviously, we ended the last episode talking about how amphibians have had a really good go of conquering the land, but they're still tied to water. Reptiles are pretty much so far removed from that. Because of that, they're able to conquer places like the desert. Various lizards have different modified scales that have turned into various display things like iguanas that have kind of got horns, the thorny devil, which is obviously meant to look intimidating to predators, and the most memorable one for me was the frilled lizard. The frilled lizard's really cool. You kind of forget about them, but they are like probably one of the more famous lizards because they've got that really iconic frill that they use to freak out predators. Ultimately, they can't really do very much else. They've not really got any other defense mechanisms, and they just kind of run away in this really funny way. If the frill doesn't really make much of a difference. And that was really good. I thought that was interesting to highlight because it's something you kind of take for granted when it comes to reptiles, I think. We talk about geckos, which are actually the furthest removed of all the lizards. Like, they're the ones that are least related to all the other ones. Their hands have obviously got these tiny little microscopic hooks. They allow them to stick onto walls, and a lot of geckos are very camouflaged, as are a lot of other lizards. Chameleons are kind of hinted at. I kind of feel like that would have been the animal to talk about. This series is usually very, very good at using examples to discuss their points. They didn't really use chameleons, which I guess maybe they would have been a bit obvious, but it's still, you know, where my mind went. And after that, we go back to the Galapagos, where we spend quite a bit of time. So the Galapagos giant tortoises are highlighted in quite a lot of detail. They use them to discuss all turtles and tortoises. There's a lot of things that are really interesting about them. Obviously, the shell is the most notable thing about tortoises, but they do a good job of using them to highlight reptile life in general, how they're able to live for a very long time because their metabolism's so slow, and he highlights how tortoises have been around for quite a long time. He says that they're the most ancient group of reptiles, and they might be, to be fair, but I don't think tortoises were always like this, which is kind of what they insinuate. I will say there is some information in this episode that has definitely become dated. That's maybe one of them, but tortoises are undeniably a very ancient lineage of reptiles. And the marine iguanas are talked about in quite a lot of detail. The marine iguanas are actually a great example to talk about with thermoregulation. Because reptiles are ectothermic, they're cold-blooded. They basically get all their heat from the sun, and you basically get a glimpse in the day of a life of a marine iguana, which has got quite an extreme life, to be fair, because it's got to heat up in the morning at the heat of the day. But as they're in the tropics, it can get too hot, and they've got to cling to the side of these rocks in the shade. That's something I've never seen before. And then they feed in the water, so they've got to spend quite a lot of time in a very cold environment that lowers their temperature down, so they can only spend so much time there. It's estimated about 2 hours. Beyond that, they actually lose energy, and they can just get swept out to sea. After they've been in the water for a bit, they get back out, and they start sunbathing again. The marine iguanas pop up a lot in these series, but there's a reason for that, and that's because they're among the most unique reptiles. Then we move on to talk about various displays and signals that various lizards use, particularly in mating. Nodding is quite common in lizards. I've never really noticed that before, but they do show various lizards nodding as a sort of signal of interest when it comes to mating. And then the mating itself is obviously quite significant because reptiles were the first animals to have sex, essentially. Internal fertilization was essential to them because they came out of land. Amphibians do not mate in the same way. They obviously live in water, where the sperm will just find an egg. Obviously on land you can't do that. We get a pretty extended sequence of the giant tortoises mating, and it does look pretty cumbersome, and they highlights that, how it is almost a bit of a joke the way it is. But apart from being pioneers in the world of internal fertilization, reptiles are also really significant for the evolution of eggs. So the watertight shell of an egg is pretty much a reptile invention. Other animals like birds have adopted it, which are, you know, technically reptiles as well. But they do a good job of demonstrating just how good a mechanism this is and how essential it was to life on land. Without the development of the watertight shelled egg, reptiles would never have been able to conquer lands like the deserts and various other really hot environments that are away from water. That is the true key to the reptile success above everything else. And there's a good sequence of tortoises hatching out the eggs. That's quite nice. And from there we move on to the most famous ancient reptiles that ever lived, and that is the dinosaurs. So the dinosaur sequence is quite extensive, and I will say this is the area where I would say the episode and the series as a whole is the most dated. Some of the stuff about the dinosaurs is not true. It's been completely proven false since this series came out. To be fair, they were working with accurate information for the time, but as this came out in 1979 and filming started before that, a lot of information has come to light since about dinosaurs, and that's obviously been changed. They talked a lot about ancient reptiles, things like Dimetrodon, plesiosaurs, pterosaurs, and they kind of implied that they were dinosaurs themselves. That's obviously not true, and the dinosaurs are obviously highlighted in quite a lot of detail. Some of the designs are obviously pretty inaccurate by today, but 1979, you give them a pass for that. And the footage of the fossils of the dinosaurs is quite good. There's really well-preserved Triceratops skull. It's very good, and they talk about things like Stegosaurus, and how his armor plating was used in a sense to thermoregulate itself. Quite good. Some of the fossilized footprints are really cool as well. The dinosaur sequence is quite good, especially for the time, but the problem is it has been dated, and the most dated part is when they talk about the reason the dinosaurs became extinct. They talk about how there's been some theories at the time about mammals that compete in them. They obviously debunk that because that's obviously bullshit. But then they talk about how dinosaurs probably died out as a result of climate change, like the Earth cooling. That has obviously since been disproved by the theory, which is now pretty well understood to be correct, of the asteroid hitting the Earth. At the time, though, that theory had not been put forward. In fact, I don't think it was too long after the series came out that scientists actually suggested that. So I'd say that is the part of the episode and the series as a whole that is the most dated, and it's a bit of a weakness of this episode, I would say. As much as I love this episode, it's a great episode about reptiles, one of my favourite groups of animals, but that aspect is definitely something that's very, very difficult to overlook in a modern day. Then we talk about the other really ancient group of reptiles that's still alive today, and that's the crocodiles. So the crocodile sequence is great. They do a really good job of showing you the crocodiles just, living their lives, basking in the sun, opening their mouths to cool themselves down. And they do a good job of showing you how this is such a primeval scene that would have been present at the time of the dinosaurs. And crocodiles are probably the best examples of showing you what life in the time of the dinosaurs was like, because they've remained pretty much unchanged since then. They do a good job of showing you the parental care that crocodiles offer. We see parent Nile crocodiles guarding the nest. I will say there's another thing that's a bit inaccurate. They say that Nile crocodiles are the largest species of crocodiles. Actually, that's a saltwater crocodile. I guess there's not much in it, but a saltwater crocodile is pretty much understood to be the bigger species, so that's maybe another weakness. Watching the female defending the eggs from a monitor lizard is great, and her actually carrying the eggs and the young into the water is obviously a very iconic sequence by now, but I think this was one of the first time they'd shown that. A lot of people at the time thought crocodiles were these really big, scary monsters, and they kind of are. But that side of them probably hadn't been seen before, so that was really good. That's probably the best part of the episode, actually. There's a lot of really good stuff in here, but I think that might be the best bit. It's a pretty good sequence. And then we go back to lizards to talk about how some lizards, specifically skinks, are in the process of losing their legs. We see that their legs are, obviously really small on the side of the body. Some of them have actually lost them. Things like slow worms have. But the most famous group of squamata that lost their legs are undoubtedly the snakes. That's where we spend the rest of the episode. The snake stuff is obviously very good. I really like snakes, as I've said in a recent video. Do a good job of showing the diversity of snakes, mainly through the movements of them. Things like boas moving a specific way, sidewinders. Various snakes have taken to the water. The egg-eating snake is shown to be the sort of ultimate end of the ability to stretch their jaws out to consume prey much larger than their mouths. That's quite cool, and watching it actually break the egg inside its body using its skeleton is quite cool. That's really good. And there's quite a lot of time spent with prairie garter snakes. You use them as an example of basically all snake life. The way they mate, the way they kind of are able to keep to the shadows until they're there en masse, the way they thermoregulate, the way they breed. It's all pretty much highlighted in that sequence. It's really good. It's a really good example to use because I think garter snakes are an overlooked species of snake by and large, but they are probably one of the more recognisable ones outside of the big constrictors and the venomous ones. And the last bit of footage we get features rattlesnakes, mainly western diamondback rattlesnakes, but we do see other species. And Ambra basically says that they are the ultimate reptile. And I don't know how you quantify the ultimate reptile. I would argue that the marine iguana might be, to be fair, the way it lives. But the rattlesnake is used as a great example of the best aspects of reptile life. Like, they're very well camouflaged, they're exceptional at hunting, the venom they've got is very potent. He does caught poison a few times, which is difficult to overlook as well. And the rattle is very impressive as well. So yeah, basically rattlesnakes have got everything covered, and they are also probably one of the most famous snakes. Certainly in America they are. And Amber ends the episode by talking about how reptiles have basically conquered the dry land, but they are restricted to warmer environments. No reptile can live in the Arctic. However, some reptiles have evolved a trait that can. They end the episode with this lingering shot of a feather, which sets up the next episode, which is obviously going to be about birds. So yeah, this episode is pretty good. It's very good for showing you the life of reptiles. I think that's great. I really like reptiles. So this was kind of tailor-made for me. Everything with the lizards was great, the tortoises, the crocodiles, the snakes, everything was great. A lot of the information, especially around the dinosaurs, has since been proven to be inaccurate. Other information has come to light. That's not really this episode's fault, to be fair, but obviously when large chunks have been disproved by science, that does kind of reduce the effectiveness of it. And while I do still really enjoy this episode, it's probably one of my favourite ones just because of the subject matter. I do find that something really difficult to overlook, so that is ultimately a weakness. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video, what you think of this episode. Let me know. I'll be doing the next one in a couple of weeks, which is about birds, so look forward to that. And yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to, it's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time, and goodbye.